Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical trivia and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week, Prosthetic Parasites. I was recently listening to a radio interview about the Paralympics, where the interviewee noted that you should expect, at some close date, the prosthetics of the athletes to push their performances beyond those of non-disabled athletes. He noted that there were already concerns about Olympic marksmen having their eyes resurfaced with LASIK, or power athletes having damaged tendons replaced with synthetics. Human augmentation seems underutilized in Ars Magica, given that we have a house dedicated to making magic items. In Ars Magica, there have been several attempts to design prosthetic limbs as magic items. Generally, these are arms that are controlled mentally. House Verdatus's Automata mystery allows the construction of mecha, but on a less extraordinary level, it also allows the construction of full-body therapeutic or access suits. My preferred method of design is for the prosthetic to be the Magus's talisman. This means it shares magic resistance, which protects it from accidental destruction, it automatically has an arcane connection, and its power scales to the Magus. The downside of this is that once the Magus dies, it's difficult to pass down the way you might will your apprentice your wand once you can no longer use it. There may be a lineage somewhere of wizards who inherit a particular arm made by a famous archmagus during the Schism War, and that they can only use it by cutting off their own arm. This might be a mystery cult initiation. I recently, however, thought of a new approach, which best suits House Merenita. A character could have a prosthetic limb, which is a fairy creature. For companions, it would be a fairy friend, and if it was tricksy in its nature, that could explain a character with something similar to alien hand syndrome. For magi, it could be a matter of mystagogic initiation. The character severs a hand, and then grafts on a replacement made by a fairy sponsor, binding it as a fairy familiar. This would place it within the character's magic resistance and connect it to the character telepathically. A sponsor for this cult could be found in the Celtic pantheons. Nuada of the Silver Arm was the king of the Tuatha De Danann when they invaded Ireland. He lost his arm and therefore his kingship because monarchs were required to be physically intact. The healer of that set of gods, whose name I can never say, made him a prosthetic arm out of silver. When the healer's son dug up Nuada's severed arm and reattached it, the father killed the son in a fit of professional jealousy, which you'd only expect in the modern day from Verdatus's magi. This Nuada turns up in cognate forms in Welsh folklore as Nud and Lud, who was the creator of London. He's also Nodens, which was mentioned in the episode on water magic. In the real world, prosthetics tend to become popular after wars. The American Civil War led to widespread use of replacement limbs, as did the Second World War. Magi might not have been inclined to use prosthetics, but the harvesting of humaniform fairies that occurred during the Schism War may have prevented them from just regrowing lost limbs. Even if sufficient vis was available to regenerate magi, only the most favoured of non-magus servants would be likewise repaired. Lesser servants would have little choice but to use some sort of aid. How many of them might be tempted by a new hand or leg, even if, for example, they needed to sleep with it in a pail of milk beside the bed? In Against the Dark, we mentioned a Hungarian tribe of wizards who can pull off parts of their bodies and send them on missions. Hands, eyes, ears. The odd thing is that the parts aren't just alive and capable of independent action. When severed, they retain nervous connection, so a person can see through the separated eye and hear through the separated ear. Even the Magus's heart can be pulled out and used to revive the dead, although this may only work on people who were killed by fairies, in which case the whole thing is likely a ruse involving changelings. We had these wizards aligned to the magic realm because Empedocles, the writer who created Creum and cosmology, believed that human organs were once independent creatures which moved through the world until they combined into vast symbiotic communities. This need not be the case. Fairies, magical spirits of corpus, or even demonic body parts could be grafted to people. The Hungarian Magi also demonstrate another frightening possibility. There's no need to stop at one. A character might have a parasitic eye and a parasitic hand and goodness knows whatever else. In extreme cases, a magus might prolong their life by taking an entire fairy body and attaching it to their severed head, an idea for which I thank Ira Levin. That is, however, a little less disturbing than discovering that a person the characters know is actually a meat substrate for fairy growths. Having struck the term meat substrate, I'm reminded of the graphic novel Supergod, the character within it of Jerry Craven, and therefore Steve Austin, who he parallels. He has a prosthetic eye, an arm, an ear, and a leg. In mythic Europe, is this just a colony? If after the war a lot of companions took fairy limbs, given that the creatures do not require sustenance to survive, could the limbs still be about? They probably aren't, as they contain precious corpus spheres, but if they are, can a character get one just by digging it up, much as Mach did for Nuada? If you dig them up, and do not attach them to yourself, can they be used to create monstrous human forms that can be controlled using Weem magic like the Colossus of Yulorn? For those of you who aren't into Clark Ashton Smith, you should be. It's an early horror story in which a team of necromancers use an alchemical process to craft a giant out of corpses, and then they terrorize the countryside. They ride around on the Colossus in a gondola slung over its neck, as I recall. It's possible that some of these fairies control their hosts. I mentioned before the idea of alien hand syndrome, but fairies manipulate humans by various degrees. Some will just colour the mind with a single emotion. The person gets braver or more afraid or more angry. Some, however, have a deeper level of control using hallucinations. Players will hate this if it's used on their characters, but for enemies it's an interesting idea. Even for player characters, it might be welcome if remedial. Could a character be braver if monsters were smaller, happier if colours were brighter? Can you cure personality flaws with a fairy prosthetic? I've been really interested in Saculina parasites intermittently for a decade. I sold a version of them, which looks like a crown of thorns starfish, to Atlas Games as the Acanaster for their D&D bestiary. Saculina parasites grow within crabs. I suppose, Pokemon players, that they're the inspiration for parasects. The Saculina is technically a barnacle. It burrows into the crab and hijacks its brain. It makes the crab act female, grows roots through the crab's body and brain, and reprograms the crab to tend the brood of the barnacle as if they were immature crabs. I can see a fairy hand being like this, a destructive, contagious parasite, leading up to a saga arc, where the player characters destroy the plague. For a level of body horror, what if when you kill an enemy, bits of him slide away and he seems to be falling apart? Only later do you discover that your enemy was really just the left eye of the body you were fighting, and it's found a new host. What if each of the growths finds a new host? Fairy organs also allow xenotransplants. Want a cat's eyes? Want to have wrist spinnerets? I think either could be gained as a mystery cult initiation. Alternatively, some fairy hunter traditions may be able to take pieces from the creatures they have defeated and transplant those pieces either into themselves or into an alternate form that they can assume. Fairies being so variable, it's possible that many of these explanations could simultaneously be true. You could have a hero with an arm granted by Ares fighting a warlock, made of click-apart organs that are coating an involuntary host.